What's going on, everyone? This is Tyler May here, Himalaya ride enthusiast and entrepreneur. I'm back here once again as I bring you chapter 9 from my book, The Himalaya, where the strobe flash and the mirror ball spins. Basically, my book is about my story on how my fascination with the Himalaya ride started, which leads me to my journey to one day call one of those classic rides of my very own. So if you'd like to purchase your copy, you can get it on Amazon or my online store, where you can also get some Himalaya fan-based merch, along with my clothing line, Swiss Gear. Web addresses show below this screen. So without further ado, I'm going to read you chapter 9 from my book, titled, There's a New Ride in Town. Summer had ended, and I started my freshman year in high school. This time I wasn't only in the new school, I was also in a whole new school district as well. And I already had that sinking feeling I would be in for one interesting ride. Back in my previous school in Dover, I had quite a few friends, but I always considered myself an outcast because I was so different from everyone else, mainly because I didn't really fit in with their normal stereotype, and I had never really cared about being the center of attention. So my new experience in high school was no different than what I was already used to. At least in my previous school, I knew people that were my enemies at first, but then later in the year, we eventually became good friends. In this case, however, that was out of the question with these guys. I was fortunate to meet a few new classmates I became acquainted with, like my friend Tommy, who I already knew a year ago. Everyone else either avoided me like a disease or made an attempt to make my first year of high school a living hell, only because I was so different from everyone else, even though I tried so hard just to fit in. Some played sports, some were interested in rapping, singing, and dancing, and others just liked to get into trouble. I, on the other hand, was none of the above, so I was never welcomed by the in crowd. Instead, I just stayed to myself most of the time, though I was constantly tormented because they never saw me talk to anybody, especially girls. I felt that I already had plenty of time in my life to be in that kind of situation, so I wasn't in some sort of rush like these other guys. My main focus was to reach a few personal goals in my life and to have a good career before I got serious with anyone, because unlike those other guys, I wanted to make something of myself instead of being pressured into doing something that I may regret later in life. All through my freshman year, I was treated so badly by pretty much everyone that I could hardly concentrate on my schoolwork, so as a result, I ended up failing my first year in high school, which devastated me. As soon as my homeroom teacher gave me the dreadful news, I felt a sharp pain in my gut, not to mention a whole lot of anger that was just boiling inside of me because of the torment everyone had put me through. My homeroom teacher had no idea what I'd been through, and the teacher who saw me get tormented every day never did anything to help me through my misery. Throughout the rest of the day, I became very distant, and I didn't want to talk to anybody because I felt that they had already done enough damage. I decided to just stay to myself while being forced to listen to others talk on and on about the plans for the summer vacation. They were frequently talking about the Delaware State Fair, which was the last thing I wanted to hear because after everything that happened to me, I would be lucky if I even saw the State Fair that year. While everyone had plans for some fun in the sun, I had no choice but to enroll in summer school, which was something I thought I would never experience. My first year in high school was painful enough since day one, and now that I had to deal with it during the summer of all things was like pouring salt on an open wound. A month later, everyone started talking about the state fair, which was days away. I tried my hardest to tune them out until one day my mother picked me up from another fun-filled day in summer school when she needed to run a few errands in Harrington and then grab some lunch at Mr. Burger, which was about a few feet away from the fairgrounds. I couldn't help but spot the midway being set up. This was the first year I started to develop mixed emotions about seeing the fair after everything that had happened. So I tried my best not to look in that direction, but I just couldn't help myself. I had a very slim chance of visiting the fair that year, but I just couldn't bear the thought of not seeing or riding the Himalaya, which is something I never thought would ever happen to me after all these years. Later on that same day, commercials about the fair were starting to air on television, which just felt like I was some sort of nightmare that would never let me wake up. But I kept my composure throughout the whole ordeal and just focus on getting through summer school so I didn't have to worry about it anymore, and I could hopefully enjoy the rest of what's left of that summer. The opening day of the fair had finally arrived, as the local news reminded me over and over again. They were taking some camera shots of the entire midway. Just like a few days before, I couldn't bear to look at all of the rides, including the Himalaya, because I knew I wouldn't be able to be there to ride it. I tried to look away and even to change the channel and try to think about something else. But the thought of not seeing or riding the Himalaya that year was just too strong and began festering inside of my brain. My mother came into the room and talked to me about the fair. She then told me that since I was working so hard to get through summer school and I was taking everything so well, she made plans to take me to the fair Saturday night. I felt a sigh of relief when she talked to me, and it made things a little less painful. My mother gave me the part of the newspaper that mentioned the state fair. I looked at the article, which mentioned about a new ride that would be making its debut at the fair that year. The paper had an article with a headline that read, "Music Makes the World Go Round." The ride was supposed to have excellent lighting and an awesome sound system, but I didn't have the slightest clue what the ride was, but I knew I would find out that weekend. On that very Saturday, after a few stops in Dover, we started heading towards Harrington to the fair later that evening, along with Aunt Christine and her boyfriend Bryce. I couldn't wait to go back and see the Himalaya, but at the same time, I was looking forward to find out what this new ride was and what it looked like. We finally reached the fairgrounds around 9 o'clock that evening, and I immediately spotted the Himalaya in its usual spot, just like every year. Even though it was interesting to see what the Himalaya looked like last year without its top canvas and some of its missing parts, it was always great to see the ride back again in one piece. After I gazed at the Himalaya, it was time to get some tickets and do some much-needed riding. I got my tickets and started my first ride on the wave swinger so I can get an aerial view of the whole fair and see what kind of new rides they had in store that year. As the wave swinger took me high into the sky, I spotted another Himalaya-type ride, but it looked like it was similar to the Hurricane ride from the pier in Ocean City. It was bright and flashy, but unlike the Hurricane, this ride had all these bright strobe lights flashing inside of it. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, which was the same reaction I had when I saw the Himalaya for the first time. The Himalaya will always be my number one ride, but I had to see what this other ride was all about, which I did after I got off the swing ride. I headed to this new ride to get a close-up of it, and I saw the ride sign that said Music Express. Under a sign, I guess it was a slogan which read, "Music makes the world go round." This ride's scenery had paintings of legendary musical artists like Michael Jackson, Elvis, etc. The Music Express was operated just like the Himalaya, with a DJ that talked on a microphone and a siren. However, this ride had a lot more colorful lighting and 4 strobe lights which flashed when the ride was traveling at full speed. While watching this amazing ride, all of a sudden fog was shooting down into the ride from 4 small fog machines. My jaw dropped because I'd never seen anything like it in my life. I had to give this ride a try, so I got in line and went on. I gave the worker my tickets and he showed me to my seat, which to my surprise I had all to myself. Yes, on this ride I could actually ride by myself if I wanted to, which was refreshing because I didn't have to turn the fare upside down just to find somebody to ride with me. Suddenly the ride started moving. I held on tight as it began to pick up some speed. I looked around the ride. There were tons of colorful flashing lights everywhere. Just like on the Himalaya, the operator got on the microphone with that oh-so-famous question, "Do you want to go faster?" The crowd screamed, "Yeah!" The operator cranked the ride to full speed. The colorful flashing lights went out and the strobes came on, along with the fog machines. What an amazing ride the Music Express was. It was also great to hear the original sound of the siren just like the Himalaya used to have. The Music Express was such an outstanding ride, and it had such an outstanding experience, but at the same time, I just couldn't help but think about the Himalaya. So after the Music Express, I immediately ran over to the Himalaya where I happened to see a familiar face. However, it wasn't the original operator this time. Apparently he wasn't there anymore, so instead there was another guy who had taken his place, who was just as good as he was. He actually followed the same act as the original DJ that was usually there. He did this act so well that he could pass for his brother. The familiar face I saw working at the Himalaya was my friend Joe from high school. Joe was a senior student who had just graduated a month before, and he was one of the few people who actually treated me like a person instead of some sort of freak of nature. I gave Joe my tickets, and he asked me a question which I never would have thought anybody from this particular Himalaya ride would ask me. He asked me if I wanted to sit with somebody or ride by myself. I couldn't believe that I had finally had a chance to ride the fair's Himalaya by myself after all these years trying to find somebody to ride with me. My first instinct was to take that chance until I started thinking about what happened to me on that day at the fair of '89. When I first tried to ride this particular one by myself, and I wasn't going to fall for it this time. So I decided to take the easy road and ride with somebody instead, and ended up sitting with some random kid. Suddenly the boarding lights went off, and the mirror ball lights came on, and the ride began to start moving. I was listening to the new operator that was controlling the ride, and he was amazing, and he was pretty funny too. He cracked jokes every now and then. As the ride got faster, the strobe light came on in the tunnel, and the DJ started flashing the boarding lights off and on. The ride cranked up to full speed, and I looked around the ride and just smiled throughout the entire ride cycle like nothing had changed. Even though there was a new and flashy music express that just blew me away like nothing else, being on the Himalaya just felt right to me, and nothing could ever change that. After the Himalaya, I went on a couple of more rides until I finally ran out of tickets. Afterwards, I went back to the Himalaya, even though I had no tickets left. I just wanted to be near the ride, listening to the music, and watching the ride in action. It made me forget all about my worries. At the same time, I just couldn't get over seeing someone I knew working at my favorite ride. I felt a little envious towards him, but I knew he was a good friend, so it really didn't bother me that much. Maybe one year I could help out at the fair, working at the Himalaya, or maybe operate the ride and talk stuff on the microphone. Oh, how I would just love to do that one year. 15 minutes later, my mother, along with my aunt and her boyfriend, met me at the Himalaya, and we began to call it a night. During the ride home from the fair, I couldn't help but think about the new Music Express, but at the same time, I was also happy that the Himalaya was there because the state fair just wouldn't be the same for me if it suddenly wasn't there anymore. Unfortunately, that year, I never had a chance to go to the fair as much as I wanted to, and it was also the first year that I had to miss out on both armband days, which was hard for me. However, my mother brought me back to the fair on this last day since I passed the whole summer school experience. It's been a long time since I've gone to the fair during the daytime, plus I was with my mother the whole entire time, which now felt awkward since I was older. Yes, I was that typical teenager who did not want to be seen around with his mommy everywhere he went. But this time, it really didn't matter. I was just glad to make it back to the fair that day. Even though it was the fair's last day, I was surprised that the tunnel on the Himalaya was still intact. But they did take down the mirror ball spotlights. Usually some of the big rides, including the Himalaya, have some of their detailed parts taken down, basically to save time for the workers when they start tearing them down and packing them in their trailers later that night. This time, I decided to make the Himalaya my first ride of the day. I'd already missed out on 2 armband days, so I felt like I had some catching up to do. I got my tickets and headed up the stairs where Joe greeted me. I gave him my tickets, and for the first time ever, I finally had a seat all to myself. I never thought I would ever see the day when I would actually have the chance to ride the fair's Himalaya by myself. Out of that whole summer, this was the only special moment that had happened to me. My guess was since the new Music Express allows single riders, they decided to do the same for the Himalaya. Whatever the reason was, I was just glad that barrier had finally been broken, even if it was just for that one day. I did happen to ride the Music Express as well. I noticed the fog machines from the ride were working even during the daytime, even though most rides look better at night. After the Music Express, I went back to the Himalaya where I stayed during the rest of the day until I finally ran out of tickets. Every time I got on the Himalaya that day, I ended up riding by myself, which again was the greatest thing that had happened to me so far. I'd ridden it so much that I completely forgot all about the Music Express. But as I said before, being on the Himalaya just felt right to me. This was the only time I even saw the Himalaya that year. Usually I went to Ocean City every year, but unfortunately, that wasn't in the cards for me during that summer of 1994. 2 long months later, summer ended and fall arrived, and there were a couple of changes in my life. We finally moved to our new house outside a small town of Frederica, Delaware. This was the first house where my younger brother Cameron and I had our own separate rooms. A few days later, after we were all settled in the new house, I looked in my box where I had pieces of my Himalaya model stored, along with my turntable my grandmother had given me. I looked at all the parts and started debating whether I was going to set it back up or work on a better model, but instead, I ended up making a drastic decision. I decided then to put my model making hobby on the back burner, at least for a while, and spent some time playing around with my new DJ equipment I received for Christmas the year before, but I had to store it over at my grandmother's house at the time until we finally moved to our new house. I had, however, taken the time to do some more studying on the Himalaya by watching my home video during the long days of winter. My passion of having one of my very own grew even stronger day after day. The long cold days of winter slowly passed by, and it finally started to get a little warmer. I already began to have some thoughts about summer, even though I was uncertain how it was going to turn out that year. One night my father called and mentioned that he had finally retired from the Air Force and was getting remarried. He also had plans to move back to Delaware along with his new family to be closer to me. Months later, after I celebrated my 16th birthday, my father picked me up from my house for a couple of hours and took me to their new place in Camden, Delaware. He introduced me to everyone. He mentioned that he had plans to take us all to Ocean City the following month, and he also mentioned they had filled in his new family about me and my interest in the Himalaya ride, which I planned to ride as many times as I could, to make up for that previous summer when I couldn't make that yearly trip. A few weeks later, after school was out for summer vacation, I went to stay over at my father's house for the weekend so we could all get acquainted. 2 days before we went to Ocean City, I was telling my two of my new siblings, Sharice and Antonio, about the Himalaya. Antonio had no idea what the Himalaya was or what it looked like. Sharice, however, had an idea what the ride was all about. Sunday finally came, and I was excited for our trip to Ocean City. But earlier that day, my father had plans to take me and my two new brothers, Antonio and his younger brother, Shaquem, fishing for a couple of hours, and then later meet up with the rest of the family at the house to get ready for our trip to Ocean City. My father usually liked to go there between late afternoon and early evening when it's not so hot. After a few hours of some male bonding and catching some fish, it was time to pack up our poles and head back to the house where his new wife Cheryl and her daughter Sharice waited. After getting washed up and groomed, it was finally time to hit that long road to Ocean City, Maryland. When we finally reached Ocean City, Antonio and the rest of the guys started looking out their windows, taking their first glimpse at this wonderful resort town and all of its hotels, stores, and not to mention the bumper-to-bumper traffic. As soon as we got close to the parking lot, I pointed out Trimper's amusement park to everybody, telling them that's the park I usually go to. When I saw the Himalaya, I immediately got Antonio's attention and pointed the ride out to him. We finally reached the parking lot where we made our final stop. We got out of the car and stretched our legs, and everybody took the time to get everything they needed. I, on the other hand, was ready to start heading over to the Himalaya and catch up on some unfinished business. After getting ourselves situated, we all started walking to the boardwalk where we reached Trimper's Rides. The Himalaya sat in perfect condition with every light and scenery panel in place. I happily introduced everyone to the Himalaya as we got closer to the ride. Antonio seemed amazed with excitement when he saw the ride, which is a good sign. After we all got our tickets, we split up into two groups, which meant Sharice and Antonio were with me, and Shaquem went with Cheryl and my father. As soon as we parted ways, we got our tickets, and I was ready to start riding. Before we ride on anything else, we have got to ride the Himalaya, I shouted. I could hardly contain myself. So the first ride we got on was indeed the Himalaya, where Antonio sat on the inside of the car, since he was the smallest. Sharice was in the middle, and I ended up on the outside of the car, where I would get painfully smashed by the ride's centrifugal force. It was almost getting dark outside, so the ride lighting was perfect, and every light on that ride worked. Even the small hanging mirror ball that was rotating in the vertical direction with spotlights aiming at the back of the ball, which imitated a snowfall effect on the painted winter-themed mural. The white boarding lights went out and the color wheel lights came on, changing the mural and the inside of the ride in many colors. The operator got on the microphone while slowly taking us backwards. Please keep your arms and legs inside the car and keep your feet below that yellow line as we get ready for another real fast ride right here on the Himalaya. After our first few laps, we started going a little bit faster. The ride finally reached its full speed. The color wheel lights went out and the mirror ball spotlights came on along with the strobe light in the tunnel. Once again, the operator said on the microphone, "Here we go, taking you all the way faster now." I looked over at Antonio just to make sure he was doing all right. He was tightly hanging onto the lap bar with a huge smile on his face and having a great time on this ride. We started slowing down as the operator continued to speak into the microphone. "We're going to slow you down and take it faster the other way." As the ride started to going forward, the mirror ball lights went out and the color wheel lights came back on. The operator got back on the microphone. "Do you want to go faster?" Screams of "yeah" came from the riders, and the operator continued to hype up the crowd. "If you want to go faster, let me hear you all scream loud." The crowd responded with a piercingly loud scream. The operator continued his act as he sped up the ride and changed the light show. "Everybody hang on tight as the Himalaya takes you all the way faster for you." As the Himalaya whipped us around the track at full speed, Antonio shouted out as he held on tight to the lap bar, "This is fun!" Charisse, however, implied that she was starting to feel a little sick, but started to eventually feel better towards the end of the ride. The three of us actually went on the Himalaya twice that evening, also riding on almost every ride this park had. Antonio mentioned that he liked roller coasters, so we all decided to ride the tidal wave roller coaster, which he really liked. However, he wasn't too thrilled on the zipper ride, but he did manage to pull through towards the end of the ride. Before we got off the zipper, I happened to have a great view of the pier where the Robert Hurricane ride was located, where I noticed that they had a new ride that year, which was called the Crazy Dance. I actually saw this ride in the movie once, and I was curious to see what this ride was all about. After we got off the zipper, I mentioned to them about making a quick stop at the pier to check out a new ride, but Charisse thought it would be best to stay where we were because my father was going to meet with us at 10 p.m. I asked her the time, which was almost 9 o'clock, which gave us plenty of time just for a quick stop, but still she thought it would be better if we all stayed where we were. I decided to make a bold decision to head to the pier myself for a few minutes, and then told him I would be back at the Himalaya before 10 o'clock. I knew in the back of my mind that it wasn't such a smart decision, but I knew it was something that I had to do for myself just in case we didn't return that summer. As I went to the Crazy Dance to see what it was all about, I ran into my good friend Marcus, who was staying the weekend with some friends. In the back of my mind, I wish I too was staying there with him and his friends because I was at that age when I should be hanging out with friends, which sadly was something I never really had experienced. I made sure that I kept track of the time, so I asked Marcus what time it was. He replied it was 9:30 p.m. So I figured to myself that it was a 5-minute ride cycle, so I decided to take the ride on the Crazy Dance and then start heading back to the Himalaya, which should still give me plenty of time, so I thought. However, this 5-minute ride cycle turned to a 15-minute ride going both directions. As soon as the ride finally stopped, I jumped off the ride and rushed through the crowd of tourists back over to the Himalaya where I was supposed to meet Charisse and Antonio, who weren't there when I arrived. I asked one of the workers what time it was, and it turned out to be 20 minutes after 10 o'clock. So I had that stinking feeling that they had met up with the others and started heading to the car, which unfortunately I couldn't remember where it was parked. Just like with the Music Express at the fair, I felt like I just ate the forbidden fruit, but this time I was being punished for it. Minutes later, my father showed up looking for me. I felt so relieved, but my father wasn't too happy with me with my actions that night. He started lecturing me. Once things cooled down, we started talking as we walked towards the car, where the rest of the family was waiting. As we rode past Trimper's Rides, I looked over to the Himalaya, taking my last glimpse of the night. My father asked us all if we had a good time, which we did, until about a half hour ago. During the ride home, I started regretting not spending as much time on the Himalaya as I planned due to my bold move. To make matters worse, Shaquem wanted to hear one of his CDs for a while, so I ended up listening to all this kiddie crap blasted from the car system for about 2 hours, while they all turned the long drive into one big sing-along, which drove me absolutely nuts. I said to myself while trying my best to tune out that dreadful kiddie music blasted from the car stereo. If I just stayed at the Himalaya, maybe things would have been a little different, and maybe I've been in a better mood for this stuff. After we stopped for some late-night dinner, we finally reached Frederica, Delaware, where my father dropped me at home around 1 a.m. I went into my room and went straight to bed that night. I was too tired and too irritable to even unpack my suitcase for that weekend. After I took some time to recover from the trip to Ocean City and the cruel and unusual punishment that filled my ears during the long drive home, I started to think about the fair that was coming during the following month. And there you have it, guys. That was chapter 9 from my book, with a hysterical ending. Hope you enjoyed it so far. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and let me know what you think. And be sure to buy my book, where you can buy on Amazon or my online store, along with some tons of fan-based merch. I'll be back on here next month with chapter 10. So as we say in the Himalaya world, keep that mirror ball spinning. Take care.